morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'd like to talk a little bit about what recruitment is doing right now in 2022. So I work with Eric Eisenberg very closely. We recruit a lot of dining and facilities type positions. Sorry, where's the And really what we focus on is a really holistic recruiting experience. So as I talk to you a little bit, I want you to try and take some pieces of information and really focus on the parts of your recruiting process that you have control over, or at least influence in some way, and the things that really matter to your organization. I think in the past few years, especially with the pandemic, it's been hard for us to keep that positive attitude and just feel like, oh, it's out of my control. So let's focus on the things we can and see what we can do there. So first, I'd like to just kind of give you an overview of what the market is doing right now. I think it'll set up the rest of our speakers very well as well. And you can see here in this graph, we've had a continuous trend of voluntary resignations over the past 10 years. This was a little surprising to me as well, actually, and I want you all to feel comfort in. If you felt like the past couple of years, hey, things are getting worse, I don't know what's going on, that's true, but it's nothing we should panic over. Really what we're experiencing right now, mostly in 2021, but into this year as well, is that in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, there's a lot of people that chose to stay in their jobs that might have otherwise left because they needed a little of security while things are being crazy. So we're catching up from all of those missed resignations we had in that year and then growing continuously. So turnover, as you all have experienced, is crazy right now, and I want to give you some tools that might battle that a little bit. So first, let's talk about what's happening in the market right now. It's very much candidate driven, which I'm sure a lot of you have not experienced up until more recently. We used to have that mindset of, well, a candidate's going to come in and interview and prove their worth to me because I have 100 people to choose from. Now it's turned on its head, and candidates have more jobs to choose from than there's candidates to fill roles. So you can see that blue line on the graph. That means there's one job for every one person looking for work. We've dipped below that number post-pandemic, which means that you have to do a lot more to prove you're that employer of choice for candidates. I'll tell you a little bit about what that looks like as we continue, but really we're going to dive into what the candidate wants right now. That's what we all care about, right? We want to give them exactly what they're looking for. They're a little bit in the driver's seat right now, and so the onus is on us to take care of them and their needs. So first and foremost, in your recruiting process, whatever that looks like, I always preach efficiency and simplicity, especially in the age of the internet now. Everyone wants their information fast, easy, and transparent as possible. So trying not to hide your wages in ads and being really clear about what the job expectations are as early on as possible is important to do. Obviously, good communication is key in any sort of environment, but more than ever, candidates are expecting us to contact them up to 5 to 7 times in order to really engage them in our recruitment process. Now, once you get them into that recruitment process, really what's going to sell candidates nowadays is not what they're expected to do every day. People know how to serve, and they're going to serve, but really they want to know what we're going to contribute as an organization to their overall life. So good work-life balance is really, really important right now for a lot of people. The pandemic showed a lot of folks that remote work is possible, and so they're looking for options, or they're changing industries entirely. Food service and healthcare were two of those industries most impacted, as I'm sure you all experience. So making sure that you update things like what your insurance packages look like, providing new options like tuition reimbursement or even pet insurance is starting to become popular as well. I've seen those things really impact the conversations I have with candidates when I'm trying to even just get them in the door to interview. They don't necessarily want to speak to us until they hear that I pay 100% of their medical benefits. And then it's like, oh yeah, I'm on board. That's one less cost at my bottom line. Once they're in the door as well, and even before then, showing them what the culture of your organization looks like, and then also making sure that culture is a really positive environment is important to see for the candidates. Not only what they're gonna do in their current job, but the opportunities you're gonna present to them down the line. We're seeing more and more people leave earlier in their tenure, and so if you can show them what it's gonna look like a year from now, that might push them to stick around just a little bit. Overall, again, just iterating that a candidate experience is very important. So it's no longer what matters to you, but a little bit more what matters to the candidate. Even if they don't become an employee with you, if they have a positive experience talking to you and your team, they're more likely to refer their friends or even maybe come back in a few years when they're ready to find a new role. So let's get into some of what that actionable items look like when you're trying to update your recruiting process. The first one is that candidate pool. So not only are we trying to get as many applications as we can to choose from, we also want to broaden what we consider qualified for a role as much as feasibly possible within the organization. Then we're going to maximize communication. So that's not just how many times we interact with an employee, but then also how often and in what modes of communication we do. And then just your overall hiring process. And I point this out not because that's the obvious statement of this presentation, but because I really view your hiring process not just in that recruitment model of interviewing and getting an offer out, but that 3 to 6 months once they start on board with you, you're still recruiting that employee to keep them around as long as possible. So I picked out a few things that I do on a regular basis as a recruiter, but then hopefully you can take tidbits back to your organization. Advertising maximization, I'm going to assume most of you are not recruiters in the room, so it doesn't apply too much, but really the important note here is that sharing as much information early on is going to only succeed for you in the long term. And then your contact strategy, whether that's calling the employees and that onus is on you. The one note I have there is many people don't remember what jobs they apply to anymore. Because they have so many options available to them, they just start clicking down Indeed, and then they've forgotten who your organization is, what job they've applied to. So treat that first conversation almost like a cold call. The term screen in is becoming a little bit more popular too, and I think this is one where hiring managers can have the most impact. Previously, like I mentioned, you get a bunch of applications and then you knock off the ones that you don't like. Nowadays, you might not be getting as many applications, or that process is falling through at some point during the interviews. And so getting as many people as a funnel and kind of narrowing down will help. A note I get often from my hiring managers is, well, they've only been at their job for 6 months. They don't know, they can't do our job. And we're noticing now that, especially for those younger generations you can see up here, most of them view less than 1 year of employment and tenure as okay. They don't mind it. They don't think that impacts the quality of work that an employee can provide. And so I challenge you to change your mindset as well to say, hey, well, 6 months in my job, I learned a heck of a lot. So that should apply to every other job you have as well. The other big area that I like to focus on screen in is we have a lot of industry shuffling happening right now. There might be someone who's never worked in a food and beverage environment or even in a hospital or anything like that. It might be the opportunity to start taking a chance on the few of those people if you've got the capacity to train them really well and get some additional people that have great customer service on your team. Red carpet experience is really how I describe our interview process. And really, this is where you guys can make the most impact. You're interacting with your candidates the most out of everyone on your team. And so making sure that you're prepared and really consistent in your interview techniques is going to make you all the better for preparing that candidate to expect what your organization has to bring. So not only is this making sure that you're present physically and mentally in the interview, but also asking good questions, giving them a tour of your space, and really giving them a holistic view of what a day in your organization might look like. The biggest note I have here is for that team involvement piece. A lot of people will one-on-one interview with their manager and that's it, and then they're supposed to make a decision on whether they like your organization based on that one person. That doesn't really give them a good idea of whether they're going to be a good cultural fit for your organization. And so involving as many of their coworkers, of your coworkers, supervisors, and even your customers is going to give you some insight into how they perform in those situations, but also allow them to get a better feel for how your organization works. The last bit I touched on, I mentioned that orientation, retention, and all of those pieces are really the backbone of recruitment. So if there's any advice I can give you right now is not to spend your money on recruitment effort, but on retention efforts. That's really more important right now because otherwise it becomes a vicious cycle. I wanted to point out that over 40% of candidates leave their job in the first 30 to 90 days because that experience they had during the interview process has now fallen short once they're in the door. I'm sure you have all experienced this where, hey, we get them really excited, we get them an offer, bring them in the door, and then it takes 2 weeks to get them their badge or how to punch in on the clock or something like that. If that process isn't as neat and clean as what your recruitment model is doing, you're never gonna jump over that hurdle of retention. Another piece I'd like to point out is you as managers have a huge impact on what your team looks like. I'm sure you all know this, but also in the retention. I think making sure that you as a person, not even just as an employee, but as a person, really work well with the candidates you're interviewing, that's gonna set you up for success. We see 35% of employees leave because of their managers. That's overall across any timeline, and so making sure that you've got a good team environment is really gonna set you up for success as well. So just to reiterate, I know we haven't had much time together, but hopefully there was a few pieces of information. I saw some pictures of my statistics go up, but hopefully there's a few pieces of information you can take away, really feel like you've got ownership over them because they're important to you and your organization to make sure retention works. And then also you're in control of them. You're the managers, you make the hiring decisions. And so take that with you and hopefully we'll all have really successful 2022 retention numbers. Thank you.